Today's first lesson is from the book of Psalms. I shall read Psalm 65, verses 1 and 2, and then 9 through 13. And as always, there's hidden meanings in the Psalms. So, praise is due to you, O God, in Zion, and to you shall vows be performed. O you who answer prayer, to you all flesh shall come. And then we switch pages to get to the meat of the lesson. You, God, visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide the people with grain. For so you have prepared it. You water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with the showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with richness. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. The second lesson, the gospel lesson, comes from the book of Luke, and it is Luke 18, 9 through 14. Then, as Jesus often speaks in parables, we're going to talk about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but he was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful. I am a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exhausted. The word of the Lord.
Jesus was forever turning the order of the day on its head. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. I'd like you to imagine two different groups of people first hearing this story. One group we'll call the first-timers, the Jesus neophytes. Maybe they've just wandered by and thought, oh, I've heard about this Jesus guy. I guess I'll give him a listen, I'll give him a chance. So this group, the first-time listeners, the Jesus neophytes, they catch this opening line about a Pharisee and a tax collector, and they think to themselves, oh, we know how this story is going to go. We hate tax collectors. We don't love Pharisees exactly, but everyone knows they are holy and pious and to be admired. So these first-timers, this first group, they settle down to listen knowing how this story is going to go. Now, I'd like you to picture a second group of folks listening to this story from Jesus. They're the more experienced Jesus listeners. They've heard a story or two from Jesus. And they hear this opening line about the Pharisee and the tax collector. And they shake their heads and say, "Here he goes again, lulling us into a false sense of security. We are in for a surprise ending, can't you feel it?" Jesus was forever turning the order of the day on its head. So this second group of listeners, they have it exactly right. Jesus often teaches in parables. The parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector this morning. A parable is what the more experienced Jesus followers anticipated. A story that seems straight on, but has a surprise ending, some kind of twist. Parables overturn common understanding. One biblical scholar says parables link what we know, like a story about a vineyard or a son who wanders off and squanders a fortune, or in this case, tax collectors and Pharisees. A parable links what we think we know with how God is present and working in the world, something that we can barely fathom. Going to say that again. Parables link what we know with what we cannot see or possibly fathom, how God works in the world. During Jesus' time, tax collectors were the ultimate outsiders. They collaborated with Rome. They had contact with the Gentiles. According to Jewish law, that made them ritually unclean, so they sometimes couldn't worship in the temple. So on the one hand, in the story, we have the ultimate outsiders. We have the tax collectors. Then we have the Pharisees, dedicated to the purity laws, dedicated to temple worship. In Jesus' day, everyone knew these were the good guys, the ones you looked up to. But Jesus forever turned the order of his day on its head. So Jesus tells our lesson from Luke this morning, and the first-time hearers say, "Knew it, that Pharisee, always doing good stuff, fasting, tithing, for heaven's sakes. And that rotten tax collector, an admitted sinner, knew it, bad guy." And then there's the whammy at the end. The tax collector turns out to be the one exalted by God. The tax collector, the ritually unclean one, the collaborator with Rome, the outsider. He is the good guy, Jesus says. He is the one to be admired. Parables link what we think we know with that which we cannot see or fathom, how God is present and working in the world. One of my colleagues in ministry writes that the folks who were followers of Jesus, who had heard a parable or two, they began looking around for some loaves and fishes because they always got hungry after these surprise endings. The first-time hearers scratched their heads saying, but there's the law, and the Pharisee kept it, and the Pharisee tithed and stands for all what we're supposed to look up to, and we're so confused. What happens to the Pharisee after his prayer? Not very much. He believes he has it all. He doesn't really show a need for God. But the tax collector knows he is lacking, and he knows he needs mercy. What's going on? Jesus is inviting us to focus away from the law and on a relationship with God. The Pharisee was all about the law, and that's not presented as bad. Let me be clear about that. Jesus doesn't say the law is a bad thing. Jesus presents what is better, making room for God, inviting God into one's life and faith. Before I came to Londonderry, I volunteered at a Christian community outside of Atlanta, Georgia, called Jubilee Partners. I taught English as a second language to refugees, and I loved it. I came to know many people from around the world as they were welcomed as refugees into our country. One of the folks I came to know was a man named Blake Ortman. And after I was invited to come here and be the interim minister, that's how I started here, but that's a story for another day, which I'll be happy to tell you. After I was invited here to Londonderry as the interim minister, I was having a conversation with Blake. And I said, I'm nervous about going there. I hope I can be a good minister. Blake is tall, and he had a beard then, and he stood in front of me like this, nodding. He said, "You're scared?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Are you really scared?" I said, "Okay, I'm really scared." And he goes, "That's great." And I said, "That's great?" He said, "That's great because that means God can work through you. There's room for God. Be sure to tell the church how scared you are." I didn't do that. Some of you have heard that story before. Blake's point is such a good one, although hard in a way to get our minds around. We need to make room for God. In the story that Jesus tells this morning, that's why the tax collector was the man to be admired. Not his actions necessarily, but his openness to God's grace. The Pharisee, according to the structure of the day, had all the right actions, laudable, commendable. But in all of those laudable, commendable actions, there was hardly room for God. No opening to receive God's grace. Jesus was forever turning the order of the day on its head, his day and our day. The invitation this morning is to some reflection on my part and on your part. What do we think we know? And yet God may be working in ways we cannot see. I hope and pray for a Blake in your life. Someone to be excited when you are scared of a new adventure. Someone who invites you to see life and circumstance in a surprising and unexpected way. I hope and pray that you are open to considering how very much Jesus turns the order of the day on its head. May we resist being as comfortable as the Pharisee, and may we be as open to God's grace and presence as the tax collector. May you and I be open to shifting our focus from the law in whatever form that takes, to God's presence in our lives and faith, and God's invitation to our hearts and minds in whatever form that might take. May God bless us always in our learning and our striving and our desire to be open to receiving all the grace that God has to give. Amen.